Hello, ESLA members and others interested in today's topic, which is swimmer's itch. This will be our third interview that we've done since the pandemic began with people who have expertise on various topics of interest to the folks who live on our waters and maybe a few other waters as well. Today's interview will be conducted by Jan Garvey. She heads the Elk Skegemog Lakes Association's Environmental Committee and has been working on this issue on swimmer's itch and with specifically our expert on swimmer's itch, Ron Reimink, who is a principal of Freshwater Solutions. Ron has been working for literally decades on the issue of swimmer's itch with lake associations, primarily in northern Michigan, and with the University of Alberta, where some experts are helping Ron with analysis of the results that he gets from the various water sampling and observations. Ron, I might also add, is himself has a place up here on Lime Lake up in Leelanau County and has grandchildren and is, in addition to his interest as a scientist and researcher, is interested in, well, as a grandfather who doesn't want his grandkids to catch swimmer's itch. So, Jan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. So I've been working with swimmer's itch studies on Elk Skegemog Lake for the past 3 years. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that this is a very complicated issue and that there's no one solution that's going to save the day for our northern Michigan lakes. So we've armed ourselves with data on Elk and Skegemog lakes, and we found that it's difficult to reduce swimmer's itch by just relocating common mergansers. And that was our starting point in all of this. So I thought it would be helpful if we could have Ron talk about 3 different things. First, talk about a little bit of the history and background on swimmer's itch, then talk about what we've learned in these studies over the past 3 or 4 years, and then talk about, so what do we do now? So Ron, my first question is to help us understand the history of swimmer's itch. Some people seem to think that swimmer's itch is a recent phenomena, yet here you've been working on it for over 40 years. So what can you tell us about swimmer's itch research and control in the past and where that led you?
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to share my screen, and I got a few slides that might help us here. So if you take a look at the history, they didn't know what was causing this itch until 1928. And so people were getting it, centuries before that. But in 1928, they put the life cycle together, and they realized that there's parasites. They live in water, typically invertebrate hosts like waterfowl, and who defecate in the water. The larvae that are released from the eggs enter a snail. And then the second larval stage comes out of the snail about 30 days later and goes back into the waterfowl. And swimmer's itch then is when we swimmers accidentally get in the way, and the larval parasites called cercari don't know that our skin is not duck skin or goose skin, and they penetrate, and then they die, fortunately. But they do, in some people, cause a reaction, and that's what's swimmer's itch. So this was discovered in 1928. Let's see here. So what did they do after that? The first thing they tried to do was, well, let's kill all the snails. And so in the 1930s, and for decades, I might add, they just tried to kill the snails with chemicals. Copper sulfate was a big one. Unfortunately, there were negative ecological consequences to that. And it didn't work all that well. And so that was what they did for many decades to try to cure this, or to try to take care of swimmer's itch. Well, we actually came along in the 80s and thought, well, let's try to eliminate the summer resident vertebrate hosts, so the ducks, and we were keyed in on mergansers to see what that might do. And so we started that in the 1980s, and that has brought us up to the last few years where progress, sort of unprecedented because of some technological advances, unprecedented progress now in the last few years has made us actually even rethink what's going on with and whether that, how effective that is.
All right, well, let's move on to some of the more recent studies. About 4 years ago, Elk Skegemog Lake Association began hearing from riparians that they thought swimmer's itch was becoming more prevalent. We had not been, we, ESLA, had not been tracking incidents of swimmer's itch. So it was really, we were relying on anecdotal data, but there was enough concern. We first contracted with Ron and Freshwater Solutions in 2018. And that first study was to really do a thorough study of our overall lake systems. We continued working with Freshwater Solutions in 2019 and 2020, trying to get more data and more insight into the swimmer's itch issue. Could you briefly summarize what you learned over the past 3 or 4 years from studies on our lake, as well as some of the studies that were going on in other northern Michigan lakes?
Sure. And I will say as a preface that, you know, the ESLA has been very influential in the progress that we have made because of your commitment to really understanding what's going on. So, and the things that we found actually are having an impact much greater than just on your lake. So thank you for the past support. So in 2018, we did, as Jan said, just came in and said, we don't know what we're going to find. Let's go and see what's there. And we actually, of the dozen or so lakes that we worked on, found more cercari or worms in the water than any other lake surveyed. So you took the prize for the amount of itch-causing worms in the water. And these maps, and I know you can't see them all that well, but these red dots mean that were more than 100 worms per 25 liters. And if you're challenged metrically, that's about 6.5 gallons. So a big 5-gallon bucket, more than 100. And each one of those can cause a papule or swimmer's itch. So you can see there here on elk and then on Skegemog that many of the sites had really high numbers. We also found that there was a high density of this particular species of snail, Stagnicola, and this is the one that carries the parasite that goes through mergansers. So we thought, and even put in the final report, wow, this seems like you're going to find some success if you should, remove your summer resident mergansers. But we also didn't find very many summer resident mergansers in 2018. In fact, 2 broods to start. One of them might have been a red-breasted, and that one disappeared. And so there was really 1 brood swimming around, and on a lake your size, that was very unusual. And so we're like, that's interesting. We didn't know how many were there in 2017. And you have to realize there's a year lapse. So in 2017, if there was a whole bunch of summer residents, you could have a lot of impact in 2018, which is what we found, a lot of worms in the water. So that put a little question mark, like what's going on? There aren't many summer resident mergansers. How come? Didn't really make sense. We also found a new species of itch-causing parasite. Although we didn't know it in the time, and we just said, this is weird. This looks like a schistosome, which is the group of parasites that cause swimmer's itch. But it's coming from a snail that no one has ever in the world reported it coming from. And so we were scratching our head, and we went to work in the off season, and we actually found out that indeed, it was a new species. And so that paper actually has been accepted from the Journal of Parasitology. It'll be coming out within days. So in 2019, we thought, well, we recommend you remove your summer resident mergansers, and ESLA did. and so we came back in, they, tribute to your board said, well, we still want you to monitor and see what's going on. And we found, when we came in, we found that there were a lot of worms in the water yet, basically the same as the previous year, which was a little bit surprising because if it's summer resident mergansers, there weren't very many in 2018. So in 2019, we should have not found very many worms in the water if that's the system that was working. So it put a little more question marks in our head. We also, working with the University of Alberta, as Bob said, developed some new tests, some new assays that can not only tell you how many worms are in the water, they can tell you what species of worms are in the water. And what we found was that proportionally to the number of worms you have, the greatest proportion of worms were not the ones going through common mergansers, they were the ones going through Canada geese. At least, and I say at least because they may go through other hosts. This is so brand new, we don't know all of the different hosts it might go through, but we do know that it goes through Canada geese. So then we're like, uh-oh, what does all that mean? We also noticed in 2019 that the Canada goose population from 2018 was significantly greater. So we're starting to like question what's going on. And we test the fecal material, fresh fecal material from birds and waterfowl, and we found from the samples taken that nearly every goose on that lake was infected with the parasites that cause swimmer's itch. So we started to think about whether our first recommendation was actually accurate. So then in this past summer, we found very high numbers again, which is even more surprising now because there were 4 broods, as I understand it, in 2019 that were removed, 4 mothers and their chicks removed. And again, that's a really small number for the size lake that you have. I think in the same year, 2019 on Glen Lake, actually 2018, they removed, and Glen Lake is a much smaller lake, they removed, I believe, 18 broods from a lake that size. So to find only 4 broods still puts a question mark in our head, but those were removed in 19. So in 2020, we should not have seen a lot of fun. So I want you to look here. We did 4 weeks, all of July, every Tuesday, and there were a number of places that were over 100 worms in the water. So we said, wow, that really didn't do much. But maybe more revealing is that the new species that we had discovered in 2018, cycling through at least Canada geese, were dominant, and they were dominant again. In other words, this is the merganser one, the first one, T. stagnicola. This is the novel species one, okay? And then T. ficella, which is a different one, which we didn't find this year. But at any rate, the red means it was dominant. The pink means it was secondary. So if you take a look at this column here, the dominant species in 2020 was not the common merganser parasite. It was the one going through Canada geese. We also found, to our chagrin, was that there's another species at work that we didn't test for. It might be another unknown. It might be a very uncommon one, but it's common on your lake, or at least shows up on your lake. There were a couple of them here. The top 3 that we're finding on all the lakes, it wasn't one of those, but yet they're in the water, greater than 100 unknown species, 37 unknown species. So it just adds more question marks to what's really going on. It's not as simple as Jan said. It's just not as simple as what we had hoped and thought way back in 2017 or 2018.
So Ron, could you comment on some of the studies that were done looking at the impact of the migratory mergansers?
Yeah, I don't have any slides for that, but what we found, we did a huge, unprecedented study for 2 years on Glen, Lake Leelanau, and Walloon, and water samples were collected at 10 locations at each site, at each lake, every week from May to October for 2 years. And one of the lakes had mergansers but didn't remove them. The other lakes had mergansers and removed them. And so we wanted to try to find out what impact spring and fall migrants have. And what we discovered was that they have a huge impact, especially on lakes that are near the coast. In other words, near the flyways for migratory birds, which Elk Lake would, most of the lakes we work on are near Lake Michigan or Lake Huron. And so we did find, and that paper is that manuscript is just about ready for submission, and that'll be a big one. And so, yeah, we found that they do have a huge impact.
All right, thank you. So as we learn more about the complexity of swimmer's itch, we can, I think, all agree that the process of trapping and relocating the common mergansers is not the solution to reducing the number of parasites in the water. And really two things it sounds like that we've learned is, one is the contribution of the Canada geese, which we hadn't originally anticipated. And then the impact of the migratory ducks. And I know I live in a spot, we see hundreds of mergansers during the off seasons. As a matter of fact, I'm still seeing them because the lake is not frozen. So I guess that leads us to the question of, so where do we go from here? What can we as riparians and as a lake association do to try to minimize the impact of swimmer's itch? And what direction is this leading you in your 2021 research?
Yeah. So, people talked about, it's worse now, it's getting worse, and so on and so forth. That may make sense when you look at the Canada goose population in Michigan. The giant Canadas were almost non-existent 30 years ago or 35 years ago, and then they reintroduced them, and that population has been growing. And so it would make sense on your lake that if it would be getting worse. So that's something to think about. Also, some studies that we've done the last couple of years, we showed that an onshore wind, so if you're on the shore and it's blowing at you, is definitely going to increase your chance of getting swimmer's itch. And swimming in the morning is definitely going to increase your chance of getting swimmer's itch. So if you could swim later in the day and swim with an offshore wind, that would certainly reduce your chance of getting swimmer's itch. Having said that, however, and being a grandpa with two granddaughters, we don't want to. We're on the East Shore, so the wind is always blowing onshore, and we want to swim when we want to swim. And so we don't want to. We're not giving up on this. It's way more complex than we ever imagined just 4 years ago. However, we do have a plan for so that we can swim itch free. And I'm going to share this one more time here and show you. Let's see, here we go. So the 2018-2020 data suggests lake-wide control, as Jan said, is probably not going to work, and it's likely going to be ineffective. You'd have to do mergansers, geese, probably mallards. So what do you do now? And we really believe that we need to have a paradigm shift as far as how we look at swimmer's itch. And as we explained before, in the 30, we tried to eliminate the snails. And then for a couple decades, we tried to eliminate the ducks and geese. And we know now that the best path forward is to really target these larvae entering the skin. And we are starting an initiative called Project Prevent. It's an acronym for what it means. And we really believe that we need to treat these guys like we do mosquitoes. We know that mosquitoes are important. There's a lot more evidence coming out that these cercaria are actually important to the ecology of the lake. That things eat these. These are a food source. And so we're going to look at targeting the actual cercaria entering the skin. There are some advantages to this. It's expensive to get rid of all the snails or to try to get rid of all the waterfowl. And if we just work on prevention, your association is going to have a lot more money to tackle other, invasive species, and you name it, the different things that are out there. We think that this is going to give the most control to riparians. So you always wonder, is it a bad day? Is it a good day for swimmer's itch? Should the girls go in or not? And if we go with prevention strategies and we actually have some that really work, that's going to give power to the people who say, hey, if we do this, we know you can go swimming, swim as long as you want. Doesn't matter the time of day, doesn't matter onshore wind, doesn't matter if we have geese or mergansers. Plus, less than 50% of the people even get swimmer's itch. So we're really talking to those people that year after year, they're plagued with swimmer's itch. This will have minimal ecological impact. We can leave the aquatic environment intact, which is there's more and more data coming out that we want to do that. And who cares what species are there? You could have multiple species. All of that doesn't matter if we're just looking at effective prevention strategies. So we are beginning a collaborative effort among many lake associations, hoping in 2021, if the funding is there, and we're using citizen scientists throughout to empower riparians to swim itch-free using the validated prevention strategies. I think over the last 40 years, I have heard probably a couple dozen different prevention strategies that people swear by. Like, we do this every time and we never get swimmer's itch, but it's all anecdotal. Nothing has ever been tested to say, hey, this actually does work. And so we are hoping to start that, and you may want to check out your ESLA webpage for that too, if it's something you're interested in or you're plagued with swimmer's itch, because this is really what we're looking at. We're looking at shifting the focus back to just preventing the worms from entering your skin, whatever method or methods that you might want to use. So that's where we're really at.
Ron, can I jump here? I'm going to jump in here just for a second on the suggestions that you have for prevention. One of the things that has struck me from your past research is the depth of water, specifically that area where little kids are most likely to play, that first yard or two into the water. Hasn't your research shown that that is where the highest concentrations occur, specifically when you have those onshore winds?
Yeah, so we try to visualize these cercariae. They come out of the snails every morning. They only live for a day, and they go right to the surface. So we kind of visualize them as like pollen. If you're up there in the spring and you see this pollen sitting on the water, that's really what these cercariae are like. And when there's an onshore wind, all of that pollen, all of those cercariae are getting piled up literally in the first meter or two of water, in this deep, right where the little kids want to sit. And it's not just a little bit, it's like exponential growth in how many worms you have in the water if you have an onshore wind. So even to go, and I know with little kid, I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, we don't want to go out in deep water, but maybe just go out a little beyond if it's shallow enough to play in the water that's a little deeper. You're gonna prevent you're gonna get out of the heavy worm counts. So yeah, you're right. And I will put if you want to learn more, if this has been interesting to you as a observer here, on February 26th, and you can again check your ESLA webpage for details. There's a free webinar on this topic along with other water quality issues this year, 2021, February 26th. So certainly check with the website or Jan or Bob, and they can direct you to that.
Great. Well, thank you, Ron. I think it's interesting how far the research has come in just a few years, and things that were standard practice a few years ago, we're finding, are not our solution. So I'll be anxious to participate in your conference to hear more. And I know one of the things that you'd mentioned to us in the past was the use of rash guards, or having some of the kids wear that. Well, this summer we had a summer intern who was the person that was jumping in and out of the boat in some of these highly infested areas, collecting the water samples for us. And we had her wear a pair of a little bit heavier, like yoga pants or tights.
Yeah.
And she didn't get any swimmer's itch where she did in 2019 when she was out sampling. So, you know, I think things like that, not that you want to wear clothing when you're swimming, but there are some things that may work, especially for the young children.
Yeah, and we'd like to put some solid science behind that, you know, so it's not anecdotal. We can actually say that this has been proven as a prevention strategy. And those are the kind of things we'd like to do. And we're going to need everybody's help to get there. It's not something we can do alone. But if we all sort of join together, I believe we can make some great advances here just in the next year or two. So that's exciting. We're not giving up. We are not giving up. We are mad dogs. We are going to get it. And again, as Bob said, I'm a grandpa and I want my kids to love coming to the lake, and I want them to love going swimming in front of our place. We just have to learn ways to do that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ron, for your insights, and Jan for your smart questions of Ron. And we hope that those of you viewing this recording have enjoyed it and maybe learned something. And we would invite you, if you have other ideas for people you'd like to hear from, talking about our waters, Elk Skegemog, the Torch River, the Lower Rapid River. Feel free to send your suggestions to Elk Skegemog Lakes @gmail.com. Thank you very much.